Hello, historians! This is Mrs. Blansett, and this set of notes kicks off Unit 2. The first set of notes for Unit 2 is on the foreign policy of the early U.S. presidents. And if you don't know what foreign policy means, then you can learn that definition when we start our notes. The first page of notes for foreign policy looks like this. If you are absent, or were absent on the day that we do these notes, go ahead and put an X across this page. We won't have you complete this page. This was just an activity to get students engaged during the class period. When you're ready, go ahead and find the page that looks like this for Unit 2, Growth and Expansion Notes 1. All right, so for the first 5 presidents, well, really for the first presidents in general, not just the first 5 specifically, they had a big job to do in sort of defining what the United States stood for, defining what kind of a nation we would be amongst other nations in the world. And so part of our focus on U.S. history isn't just what's happening inside of the country, but it's also focusing on what happens outside of the country and how that affects the United States. And that really is what foreign policy stands for. Foreign policy is the government's strategy on how to deal with other countries. And there are different ways to deal with other countries. The most extreme, of course, is war. But often we use just talking or negotiation to deal with other countries. If we have some sort of conflict, to talk it out is better than to fight it out. And then there is also the method of using the economy or trade to deal with another country. And so we'll look at a couple of those different ways to manage our relationship with other countries as we continue through this set of notes. First, we're going to focus on the first president, which is George Washington. He was president, or while he was president, Great Britain and France were at war with each other. And one of his goals was to maintain trade with both of those European countries. Washington knew that as a brand new country, we didn't have the military power quite yet. We also didn't have very much money. And so instead of getting involved in their war, he decided to stay out. And he practiced what is called isolationism and neutrality. And you can see those definitions in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. So to be isolated or to practice isolationism means to avoid political and military agreements with other countries, because ultimately they could entangle you in those other countries' issues. Neutrality means not choosing sides in a dispute between other countries. By choosing sides, that really pulls you into the issue by taking one side or the other. And of course, the goal is to not take sides or to stay neutral. Washington was president from 1789 until 1797. And during that time, while Great Britain and France were at war, his dilemma was how to maintain trading with both countries. So he did take on that policy of isolationism and neutrality so that he could maintain a healthy relationship with both countries and try not to get involved or take sides. During John Adams' presidency, the second president of the United States, some new foreign policy challenges developed, mostly because the British had some troops in the forts in the Ohio River Valley that had been there since before the Revolutionary War. And France was really hoping that this would lead to a war between the U.S. and Britain. Britain and France were still at war with each other, and France was hoping that the United States would take sides with France because it was angry with Great Britain. But ultimately, Adams was able to negotiate a treaty with the British to get those troops out of the forts in the Ohio River Valley. This made the French upset, And so they started to seize American ships, American trading ships specifically. Adams and Congress began to spend money to build up the U.S. military, including naval ships, to help protect our merchant ships, our trading ships. And then France's new leader, Napoleon, agreed to work towards peace. So John Adams, who was president from 1797 to 1801, had the dilemma of having those British troops in the Ohio River Valley and the French Navy attacking U.S. ships who were just trying to bring trade to foreign countries. The solution to the issue in the Ohio River Valley was to negotiate a treaty, which is known as the Jay Treaty, with Britain. But also, in order to deal with the French attacks on our merchant ships, he went to Congress and asked them to build up our U.S. Navy, and then ultimately made a treaty with France to keep the peace. The third president of the United States is Thomas Jefferson. During his presidency, the French and the British continued to fight their own war. And because the British needed more soldiers, the Navy began to kidnap U.S. sailors from our merchant ships and force them to serve in the British Navy. Elsewhere in the world, the ruler of Tripoli, which is located in northern Africa, demanded the U.S. pay money to continue protecting our ships from pirates. When Jefferson said no, the leader of Tripoli declared war on the United States. And so we started a small war with the country of Tripoli in 1802, which ended in 1805. Something else Jefferson tried to do was to put an embargo on trade with France and Britain. An embargo simply means that you stop trading with another country. And while it hurts them because that means they're not getting money from our trade, it also hurts us because that means our business people are not getting money from the trade either. So for Jefferson, he was president from 1801 to 1809. His dilemma, he had a couple, was that the British Navy was kidnapping U.S. sailors, and also that the ruler of Tripoli demanded tribute or war. The solutions? Well, Jefferson sent our naval ships to fight in Tripoli, and he also tried an embargo to get Britain and France to leave us alone, to leave our merchant ships alone. But ultimately, this hurt trade in the United States because that meant our business people were not making money, because we weren't trading with two of the richest nations in the world. The fourth president is James Madison, and during his presidency, France and Britain were still at war with one another. Madison offered a deal to both countries that the United States would stop trading with the enemy of the country who promised to leave our ships alone, and France quickly agreed. So the United States stopped trading with Britain, but this made Britain more angry, so they continued to kidnap U.S. sailors and to seize the ships headed to France. Britain also was sending weapons to American Indians who were fighting white settlers on the western frontier. And that was just too much. Madison ultimately went to Congress and asked Congress to declare war on Britain. This becomes known as the War of 1812. So, President Madison's time in office was 1809 to 1817. He had the dilemma of the British interfering with U.S. trade and also the British supplying American Indians with weapons. The solutions were that he made a treaty with France, which is what caused France to stop harassing our merchant ships. He asked Congress to declare war on Britain, which we fought the War of 1812 and won, which ended with the Treaty of Ghent. Finally, the fifth president of the United States is James Monroe. Things were finally quieting down in Europe. Britain and France ended their war with one another, but there were some situations heating up on our side of the world, in the Western Hemisphere. Regions from Mexico through South America were rising up against Spain, the European country that controlled them. Americans and the British supported the independence movements of these new Latin American nations. They hoped that they'd now be open for trade. Other European countries wanted to support Spain. In 1823, President Monroe issued the Monroe Doctrine, named after himself, warning European nations to stay out of the Western Hemisphere and declaring the Americas closed to colonization. So, our final president we're talking about is James Monroe, president from 1817 to 1825. His big dilemma was that there were some European countries who wanted to help Spain keep its Latin American colonies in the Western Hemisphere. The solution? He issued the Monroe Doctrine and told Europe, the Western Hemisphere was closed to colonization and to stay out of the Americas. He was taking a stand in terms of America's power. We were not a powerhouse nation to begin with, but he wanted the United States to be seen as a power on the world stage, and this was his attempt to do that. That wraps up Notes 1 for Unit 2. Have a great day.